What ended your feelings for someone you were madly in love with? This is going to sound really strange, but he turned into a classist. When we first met, he had a solid job and was making about twice my salary. Despite the difference in our incomes, he was incredibly generous, kind, and loving. He never once looked down on me for earning less than him, and it never felt like money was a problem between us. Over the course of the next decade, he switched jobs a couple of times. Meanwhile, I stayed at the same company, gradually climbing the ladder even though my income still wasn't anywhere near his. We were happy, or at least it seemed that way. I was proud of the work I was doing and he was supportive, always encouraging me to keep pushing forward. Then everything changed when he landed this amazing job that seemed too good to be true. The company practically threw money at him, and he started receiving quarterly bonuses that were equivalent to my entire yearly salary. It was astonishing, but I was genuinely happy for him. I knew how hard he had worked to get there, often putting in 13 to 15-hour days for months on end with barely any time off. He was thriving, and I couldn't have been prouder. However, the demands of his new job took a significant toll on our relationship. He was always working, constantly traveling for business at the drop of a hat, and our time together became more and more limited. Despite the growing distance, I continued to support him because I knew how much he loved what he was doing. I thought we could weather this storm together. Around the same time, we moved into a new apartment. It was small, but for the first time, I was living alone without roommates, and I was ecstatic to have a space that was entirely my own. The apartment wasn't anything fancy. The decor was stuck in the 90s, but it was in a safe neighborhood with controlled access, close to my job, and it was blissfully quiet. I thought it was perfect for me. When he came to visit my new place for the first time, I was excited to show him around, but instead of sharing in my enthusiasm, he immediately started criticizing everything about it. He made comments about the neighborhood, asking if I was sure it was safe and implying that it looked like a place where people did substance. I was taken aback. A close friend of mine had lived in the same complex and assured me it was a great place to live. Affordable, quiet, and safe. I initially chalked up his remarks to him being overly protective. But it didn't stop there. He began making jokes about how little my apartment was and even expressed concern that his car might get stolen from the parking lot. Mind you, he was driving a 2010 Jeep in 2018. Not exactly a luxury vehicle, so the comment felt even more insulting. That visit was the first and last time he ever set foot in my apartment. From then on, we always stayed at his place, a fairly new rental home in an upscale neighborhood. As time went on, his attitude only worsened. The more his salary increased, the more condescending and dismissive he became. He started to act like he was better than everyone else, especially those who didn't meet his new standards. And I, unfortunately, began to feel like I no longer measured up. I've never forgotten where I came from, abject poverty, and I worked hard to get where I am today. It hurt deeply when he belittled things that weren't up to his standards, as if my background and efforts meant nothing to him. I've tried not to take it personally, but it's become impossible to ignore. The person I fell in love with, who was once kind, humble, and understanding, has transformed into someone I barely recognize, someone who now views the world through a lens of superiority and entitlement. I've realized that I can't keep pretending everything is fine. The truth is, I can't be with someone who thinks they're better than everyone else, including me. So after almost 15 years together, I've made up my mind. When I see him on Tuesday, I'm going to end things. It's going to be incredibly difficult, and it breaks my heart to do it, but I know deep down that I deserve to be with someone who respects me for who I am, not for how much I earn or where I live. I never imagined a relationship would end like this, but I can't continue to be with someone who has lost sight of what truly matters. Wow, who knew a 2010 Jeep was the gold standard for transportation? Story 2. I still have some feelings for him even after 5 or 6 years, and I probably always will. But looking back, it's clear that things had to end the way they did. We were in a long-distance relationship, and despite the challenges, we were seriously planning how marriage would work between us. But then we got into an argument. One of those fights that start over something small but reveal bigger problems beneath the surface. He had promised to do something, and when he didn't follow through, I called him out on it. Instead of working through it, he dumped me. What followed was over a year of back and forth, an exhausting cycle of talking and then going silent, sometimes for weeks at a time. I was desperate to fix things, to get back what we had, but he didn't seem to want the same thing. Still, he kept wanting to stay in contact, like he couldn't fully let go either. It was a confusing time, and I was constantly torn between wanting to move on and holding on to the hope that we could make it work. About a year and a half later, after so many failed attempts to reconcile, I decided I had to let go for good. I told myself that if the next cute guy asked me out, I'd say yes. just to force myself to move on. Sure enough, someone did, and I took the leap. That's when the real mess started. My ex suddenly decided he wanted me back, or so he claimed. He began texting me nonstop, accusing me of all sorts of things, calling me every name in the book. It was like he couldn't stand the idea of me being happy with someone else, even though he was the one who had pushed me away. The breaking point for me was when my grandpa passed away. My ex reached out to say he was sorry for my loss, but then immediately turned the conversation back to himself, saying he didn't care about my feelings. He even texted me during my grandpa's burial, not to offer support, but to ask if I was with the other guy, who at that point was little more than a friend. That was a moment of clarity for me. It showed me just how little he truly cared about what I was going through. But what really sealed the deal was when he started talking to the girl who had tried to get him to deceive me. He had the nerve to tell me that she was a better person than me. Later, he even bragged about going on a date with someone else, going on and on about how amazing she was because she could do all these cool things. It was like he was trying to hurt me, to make me feel like I wasn't good enough, and it worked. But it also helped me see that I deserved better. Ironically, every time I tried to distance myself from the guy who had asked me out, to figure out what I really wanted, Max would start his drama again. It was like clockwork. Eventually, I just said, stop it. I decided to enjoy my time with a guy who actually wanted to be with me. That relationship ended up being the longest one of my life. We're not together now, but there's still a lot of mutual love and respect between us. Who knows what the future holds? I'm just grateful for the years we had together, and for the fact that I was able to move on from someone who never truly valued me. After 5 years of back and forth drama, she realized her ex was like a clingy Wi-Fi signal. He only wanted to connect when she was finally getting a stronger signal from someone else. Story 3. In high school, I thought about the world of this guy. He was an all-state swimmer and a top debater, sharp, confident, and charismatic. His name was Luca. With his tan skin and striking green eyes, he was the kind of guy who turned heads effortlessly. After a few dates, he asked me to go with him to a barbecue celebrating his brother's acceptance into Berkeley. I was excited. This was our 5th date and things were getting serious. When we arrived, I was blown away. The house was spacious, a sprawling estate that screamed old money. His parents were bigwigs in the San Francisco political scene, and their wealth was evident in every detail. From the manicured lawns to the natural pool, one of the first in our area. The backyard was filled with over 100 people, all mingling and enjoying the catered barbecue. It was like something out of a movie, and I felt a bit out of my depth, but Luca made me feel comfortable. We swam in the pool, lounged by the water, and enjoyed the food. Everything seemed perfect. But as the evening wore on, things started to unravel. Luca's brother, the guest of honor, was clearly intoxicated, probably on something stronger than drinks. He seemed angry, pacing around the party with a scowl on his face, muttering under his breath. At one point, Luca took him aside, trying to calm him down, and their mom and his brother's girlfriend joined in, attempting to calm the situation, but it quickly escalated. His brother flew into a rage. The scene turned chaotic as people rushed to help, but Luca's brother wasn't done. Then he turned on his girlfriend, screaming at her. I watched in shock, expecting Luca to step in and handle the situation. He was the calm, collected one, the one everyone admired. Surely he would put a stop to this. But instead of stepping up, he seemed more concerned about how the scene looked, glancing around at the guests as if he was calculating the damage to his family's reputation. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Here was this guy I had admired so much, and he was doing nothing to help his mother. All he cared about was the optics of the situation, the fact that his grandparents and their business friends from the Bay Area were there. I couldn't just stand by and watch. I pulled out my phone and called the police, breaking up the party. It felt like the right thing to do, but the fallout was immediate. Luca was furious with me. He called me names for involving the authorities, saying I had no idea what I had done, or this would affect his family. I walked away from him that night, and I never spoke to him again. I didn't even look at him in the hallway at school. It was like a switch had flipped in my mind. Everything I had thought about him, all the admiration, the feelings I had, it was all gone in an instant. That night I saw a side of him that was so cold, so calculating, that it chilled me to the bone. She realized that maybe she should have just stuck to dating guys who weren't one family barbecue away from a reality TV meltdown. Story 4. My wife made a significant decision without consulting me. She got a dog. We had talked about getting a pet before, and I was clear that we needed to discuss it more and make that choice together. It was a significant commitment, after all. But one day she announced that she was driving somewhere to look at a dog, so I texted her a reminder about our agreement to decide together. To my dismay, she bought the dog anyway. At first, I wanted to be supportive and give the new addition a chance, so I tried to make it work for 6 months. But the dog turned out to be a nightmare. It was hyperactive and destructive, constantly causing chaos in our home. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to accommodate this new pet that I hadn't agreed to bring into our lives. Eventually, we started discussing the possibility of rehoming the dog. However, she seemed hesitant and dragged her feet in the matter. I reached a breaking point and told her directly that the dog had to go. It was affecting our lives in so many negative ways. I couldn't handle it any longer. Finally, she agreed to rehome the dog, but tensions were still high. Things escalated further when she attempted to kick me out of her bedroom. I was taken aback. This was my house, which I had purchased long before we got married. I stood my ground and told her she could move out of the bedroom instead. She did, but the damage was done. Ultimately, this experience made it crystal clear to me that I needed to reevaluate my marriage. The dog incident highlighted her tendency to disregard our agreements and walk all over me. It became apparent that this relationship wasn't good for me, and soon after, we ended up getting a divorce. While the dog was just one factor in a complex situation, it was the tipping point that forced me to confront the reality of our marriage. Story 5. When we were at the Bon Voyage ceremony, the lively celebration marking our departure from the dock at the start of the cruise, complete with music, laughter, and a festive atmosphere, I found myself filled with excitement. I had meticulously planned and paid for this vacation, eagerly anticipating the chance to relax and enjoy a wonderful experience together. I wanted nothing more than to soak in the ambience, watch the festivities unfold, and relish the moment. However, when I expressed my desire to simply observe the ceremony, he threw a fit. His tantrum stemmed from his hunger to move on to something else, and it baffled me. In an act of pure petulance, he literally threw himself onto a lounge chair, pouting as if the world had conspired against him. That moment was essential for me. Something inside me broke. I had been in and out of intense therapy for the past 6 months, struggling to maintain my well-being with minimal support from him. I'd poured my heart into planning this trip, believing it would be a chance for us to bond. Yet, here he was, treating it like a burden instead of the joyful celebration it was meant to be. At that moment, I made a decision. I was going to enjoy the ceremony for as long as I wanted, regardless of his attitude. I was determined not to let him spoil this experience for me. I wanted to immerse myself in the happiness of the occasion. I would not allow his negativity to overshadow my excitement. For those curious about what followed, we stayed together for almost another year, 4 of which I was still navigating the challenges, but through it all, I eventually found a way to improve my situation. Who would have guessed? My emotional well-being began to flourish. My stress levels decreased, and I started to reclaim my sense of self and happiness. That moment at the ceremony was a catalyst for recognizing that I deserve joy and fulfillment, both in the relationship and in my life. Story 6. So this will sound silly, but a big piece of stage prop, a carpet, I believe, was partially at fault for what happened that day. Or was it my savior? Go figure. Anyway, we had just finished a photo shoot and it had been a blast. We packed up all the doodads, props, and equipment, and then we faced the hike back to civilization through the woods. It was a beautiful day. The sun shining through the leaves and the atmosphere was still buzzing with the excitement of our successful shoot. But then as we started walking, I began to notice something unsettling. Either I was going too slowly or they were moving too fast. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt like I was lagging behind while they steadily forged ahead. No matter how hard I tried to keep pace, I could see their backs getting further and further away with each passing moment. Adding to my struggle was the 80 pounds of props strapped to my back, which made every step feel like a Herculean effort. I considered voicing my concern, but I hesitated. After all, if they truly cared, I didn't want to call them out on it. If they didn't, then I certainly wouldn't force them to feel guilty. At one point when they were about 30 yards ahead, they turned back and glanced at me, a puzzled expression on their face. Huh? Are you coming? I called out. I simply nodded and gave them a thumbs up, trying to play it cool despite my growing frustration. And so we continued on like that for what felt like an eternity. About an hour or so, me pacing alone with my heavy burden while they forged ahead, seemingly unconcerned about my struggle. It became clear to me that when someone doesn't care, they will show it in one way or another, whether through their actions or lack thereof. Despite the discomfort and the emotional turmoil, I managed to appreciate the photos we had taken earlier that day. They were still kind of cool, a testament to our efforts and creativity, even if the experience on their way back had soured a bit. Story 7. I gave my husband my absolute best for 25 years. I adored him, cared for him deeply, and supported him unconditionally while I managed everything in and around our home. From the start of our marriage, I poured my heart and soul into building our life together, helping him with his job, organizing shows, and juggling countless other responsibilities. Most days, I worked doing 99.9% of the DIY projects that needed to be tackled around the house. Whether it was electrical work, plumbing, painting, cooking, cleaning, or laundry, I even took care of the pets and maintained the garden, going so far as to clean the gutters when necessary, while he focused on his work, sports, and leisure activities. I was the one fixing everything. I raised both her daughters single-handedly, especially considering that our youngest had severe ailment. I drove her to countless doctor's appointments and stayed by her side during every hospital stay, nursing her back on my own. Throughout this challenging time, I made it a priority to keep fit and take care of myself. For almost half our marriage, I held down a job while still managing all the household duties. I took charge of cooking, catering, and even barbecuing for our friends and family while he relaxed and watched sports, seemingly oblivious to the effort I put into creating a nurturing environment for us all. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed when I was struck with stroke-like symptoms and ended up in neuro ICU. Returning home, I faced the daunting task of battling through my job. Yet he acted like it was business as usual, ignoring the fact that I was struggling with severe nausea and had to undergo chemotherapy while still handling everything. I begged him. Yes, I begged him, numerous times, for help, explaining that I simply could not do it all on my own. But each time, my pleas fell on deaf ears. He ignored my cries for support. A year later, I found myself back in the hospital, coming out with even more medications that made my situation even more challenging. I had to be isolated due to chemotherapy. And when I got home from the hospital, he didn't volunteer to help me recover. Instead, he stood by as others rushed in to care for me. He even told me that he didn't have the time to look after me before getting in his car and heading off to chill with his brother for 4 days. During that time, he accidentally made a pocket call, and I overheard him discussing his feelings about me and my illness. I can't fully explain the pain I felt at that moment. Since then, he has also gone on vacation, all by himself, seemingly carefree and unconcerned about my well-being. It crushed me to realize that after giving so much of myself to him and loving him unconditionally, I meant so little to him that he couldn't muster even a little effort to support me in my time of need. Thankfully, a close friend stepped in to care for me, and my daughters offered their support as well. Just 5 days ago, I made the decision to leave my husband. I have to show my girls and myself that we're worthy of love, support, and care. Though it hurts to take this step, I know it's necessary for my healing and for setting an example of self-respect and resilience for my daughters. Story 8. The fact that I did everything I possibly could for her is what makes this situation so difficult. I showed her nothing but love and support, dedicating myself to fulfilling her needs and sacrificing a significant portion of my life in the process. I took on the responsibility for her young son while she was unavailable due to her struggles with substances, stepping in as a parent when she couldn't. I was the one who got her into the recovery program, driving 3 hours each way to ensure she got treatment she desperately needed. I sent her hundreds of dollars in care packages, filled with essentials and little reminders of my love for her. Every time I left the house without her, I made it a point to bring something back, whether it was flowers, her favorite coffee, or snacks I knew she loved. I always wanted to show her that she was on my mind, even when we were apart. I literally treated her like royalty, going above and beyond to make her feel cherished and valued, only to be kicked out one day without any warning. Faced with a barrage of accusations that were completely unfounded and hurtful. To make matters worse, she kept all of my possessions that were in the house. I've been told by friends to call the police and have heard countless opinions on what I should do or what they would do in my situation. The problem is that I know this isn't truly her. I recognize that her sanity is influencing her behavior, and I keep trying to remind myself that this isn't the person I fell in love with. Despite everything that has happened, I still have love for that woman, which complicates my feelings even further. She hates me now, seemingly connecting a bunch of dots that simply don't exist. It tears me apart to know that no matter how much I want to help or clarify things, I cannot disprove what she created in her mind. She always said that she didn't deserve me, and perhaps, in some twisted way, she was right. I just don't know anymore. What I do know is that I didn't deserve to be treated this way after everything I did for her. It breaks my heart to cry nearly every day over someone I still care deeply for, yet who has turned so far away from the love we once shared. Story 9. My wife and I started our journey together in 2008, living in a modest apartment with our uncle. It was just the three of us, and I remember it fondly as a time of simple joys and shared moments. One day they asked me if a family friend could move in with us for a while, sharing the room with their uncle. I thought it would be fine. After all, it was just a temporary arrangement, and I didn't see any harm in it. Little did I know that this decision would change the course of our lives. As time passed, I discovered that my wife had embarked on a 2-year secret relationship with his family friend. It was a revelation that struck me like a freight train, shattering the foundation of trust I had built with her. Her uncle, who lived with us, was aware of it all along but chose to remain silent until he had a fallout with my wife nearly 7 years later. It was in that moment of confrontation that she finally confessed her wrongdoings, and it broke something deep within me. At that time, we already had two beautiful children, the two people I love more than anything in this world. In the midst of my heartbreak, I made the conscious choice to forgive her. I wanted to try and continue our life together, believing that our family was worth fighting for. Over the next 5 years, I remained dedicated to my children and to a relatively happy life with my wife. But the truth is that I no longer love her in the same way. Although I still tell her I love her, something changed that day when I confronted her. I'm afraid that the love I once had for her may never return to its former glory. There's an ache inside me, a realization that I cannot leave her because it would shatter us both, and I can't bear the thought of my children suffering because of my decisions. I've remained faithful to her, resisting the temptation because that's not who I am in my core. But the truth is, I've come close to crossing that line. Every day I feel the weight of my emotions pressing down on me. It's not about seeking revenge, it's about longing for connection and love that feels genuine. I find myself yearning for the affection I once gave so freely. But now it feels like a distant memory. Even if nobody reads this, it feels good to let it out, to release some of the burden I've been carrying. My heart aches, but my love for my children keeps me grounded in this complicated reality. That is a strong man. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 10. We experienced a significant moment in our lives, a pregnancy scare. At the time we were living together and I found myself in a situation where I had what I thought might have been a false positive after missing my period. The news struck me and I was overwhelmed with emotions. We had already had conversations about what we would do if such a situation arose. Those discussions felt essential, grounding us in what I hoped would be a partnership built on trust and mutual support. However, within just a few days of the positive test result, everything began to unravel. He started to open up about the unfaithfulness he'd kept hidden from me, and I was blindsided when he left. I was devastated, crying uncontrollably as I grappled with the realization that everything we had built was crumbling before my eyes. It was clear that this situation was not just about a potential pregnancy. It was about a betrayal. In the midst of this turmoil, I knew that I had to make some tough decisions. I had been planning to drop out of college after the semester, but now I had to think about my future and the potential child's well-being. I realized that staying with him would not be good for either of us. The very next day, while he was at work, I mustered all the strength I had left and moved all of my belongings out of his apartment. I packed everything up and moved back into my dorm, feeling a mix of relief and heartbreak. For the next 2 to 3 weeks, I cried nonstop, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. It was a time filled with uncertainty and grief, but eventually, a period arrived, bringing with it a wave of relief. I took a test shortly after and it turned out to be negative. The relief washed over me, but I also felt a newfound sense of gratitude for escaping a situation that could have altered my life. Since then, I have had no contact with him. The last communication we had was after I received the negative pregnancy test, and I was grateful to cut ties. At the time, I was mostly living in my dorm, and he had treated me well until the pregnancy scare surfaced. It was baffling to realize that the person I thought I knew could turn out to be so different when faced with a life-altering moment. Looking back, I see that I dated him from an early age. Now, nearly 2 years have passed, and I can honestly say that I don't feel anything for him anymore. The experience allowed me to grow and reflect on what I truly want in life. It's a chapter I've closed, and I'm grateful for the lessons it has taught me. Story 11. Buckle up because this is pretty sad. It all started 10 years ago when I was in a relationship that I thought was going strong. I'd been dating for 3 years, and I was deeply in love. But everything came crashing down when I found out that she slept with my best friend. That betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. I wish the story ended there, but unfortunately, it doesn't. At the time, I was preoccupied with my mother's terminal illness. I had suspicions about my girlfriend's infidelity while I was visiting my friends at the same house, but I brushed them aside, believing my concerns were unfounded. My focus was on my mother, who soon passed away, leaving me in a state of grief that I couldn't fully process. The pain of her loss made me numb. I put aside my feelings about the relationship. During that time, my girlfriend introduced me to substances, which only exacerbated my struggles. I became hooked into a chaotic lifestyle for years. The darkness that enveloped me was relentless. I witnessed nightmares that I never thought I would experience, including the shocking demise of the guy who had initially introduced me to substances. I found him lifeless in a room one morning, and that moment was a reminder of how far I had fallen. It was as if my life had unraveled completely. Eventually, I decided to go to a recovery program. It was during that time that she chose to tell me everything about her betrayals and the choices she had made while I was struggling. Heartbroken, I learned that she had moved on to date another guy. A fact I only learned through mutual acquaintances who had dated him as well. Surprisingly, she eventually married him. The epilogue to this story takes a dark turn. After I worked to clean my life up and turn things around, I learned that she had also introduced him to bad habits. He ended up catching infection from a buddy of his and passed away quickly. A fate that might have been avoidable had his body not been weakened from years of substances. In a twist of fate, she came to me seeking support after he passed away. However, I turned her away. I had finally found my footing and was determined to leave the past behind me. I later learned that she married a man twice her age, which left me feeling grateful. Love can make you do and endure things, but there's always a breaking point. Story 12. For a long time, I stood by him, defending him against the opinions of others. I would lie for him, crafting stories to protect him from judgment, and I even went so far as to cut out people from my life who he didn't like. He would constantly express remorse, telling me he was sorry and that he was a bad guy. I would counter him, insisting that he wasn't a bad person. Yes, he made mistakes, but deep down, I believed he was a good person who just needed understanding and support. Despite his infidelities and moments of neglect, I found it in my heart to love him unconditionally. I put up with the late nights when he would ignore my calls and the countless excuses he made for his behavior. This cycle of breaking up and getting back together went on for a year and a half. Each time we reunited, I would hope for change, convinced that our love could overcome the challenges we faced. But then I discovered something that shattered my already fragile trust. I learned that he was talking negatively about me to others, spreading lies. The moment I found out about this betrayal, it felt like a punch to the gut. After everything I had done for him, defending him against the world and enduring his behavior, the realization that he would betray my trust in such a harsh way was the final straw. It was as if a switch flipped in my brain, and suddenly I could no longer stand him. My yearning to fight for him evaporated in an instant. I no longer wanted to reassure him that he was a good person or that we could work through our problems. The feelings I had nurtured for so long disintegrated, leaving behind a sense of betrayal that consumed me. I realized that I'd spent a year and a half battling with this man, and all it took was his words. Words that hurt me deeply, to extinguish the love I had fought so hard to keep alive. I felt liberated, yet devastated. I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. The love I once had was now overshadowed by his betrayal, and I was finally ready to walk away. Story 13. I was dating this incredible girl who, despite being the sweetest and most pure-hearted person I'd ever met, constantly found herself in a whirlwind of problems. It seemed like every time I turned around, there was something new she was dealing with. Car trouble, money concern, family conflicts, and medical condition. The list felt endless. And I was there for her every step of the way, offering support and encouragement whenever she needed it. At one point, I began to feel like she was cursed. She had mentioned that she once dated a guy who practiced Santeria, which immediately raised a red flag for me. Being a Christian, I genuinely believe that everyone has a chance for redemption, and perhaps she simply didn't know about the Lord or what it meant to have faith. My heart was invested in her. I wanted to believe that I could help guide her toward a better path. However, after being in the relationship for a year and continually supporting her through her various crises, I began to realize that this was not the kind of relationship I truly wanted. I found myself constantly playing the role of a caretaker rather than a partner. It started to weigh on me. While there was a passion in our physical connection, it began to dwindle as time went on. I noticed that she worked at a resto bar where she interacted with new guys almost every day, and while I'm generally not insecure, it felt like a turning point for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that her life revolved around bartending and partying, rather than sharing meaningful experiences together. She loved going out with her coworkers on boats and going to clubs in San Diego, while I was more focused on advancing my career and making financial investments toward my future, including buying property. There was a notable divide in our priorities. At 27, I had a clear vision of what I wanted, while she, at 25, seemed to be enjoying the carefree lifestyle. Having already explored every club and bar in my area at least 10 times, I found that the thrill of those experiences had worn off for me. Additionally, I started to notice other aspects of our relationship that were concerning. She wasn't the most active person, and I found her personal hygiene wasn't up to par with what I valued in a partner. After we had an argument, I felt compelled to express these concerns. Laying everything out on the table, I realized that it was unfair to both of us to stay in a relationship based solely on the illusion of being with someone, rather than a genuine connection. Ultimately, I learned that prioritizing my ambitions and staying dedicated to my goals was essential. I deserve a relationship that reflects mutual growth and shared values. And I truly believe my time will come when I find someone who aligns with that vision. Story 14. I wouldn't say I fell out of love. I still love her with all my heart. The thing is, I feel like I'm just a placeholder in the relationship now. In the beginning, we were inseparable. It was almost uncanny how well we clicked together. We didn't even need to do physical to feel connected. For hours, we could simply chill on the couch, laughing at game shows or playing Nintendo DS. Those were some of the happiest moments in my life, where time seemed to stand still and nothing else mattered. But don't get me wrong. I understand that the honeymoon phase eventually fades away. However, what I experienced felt different. It started with small things. She would get upset over petty things that really weren't worth arguing about, like which TV show to watch or what social media app to use. Those little disagreements escalated quickly into something more profound. Suddenly, she didn't want me in the same room as her anymore. The warmth and affection we used to share have vanished. No more hugs, no leaning against each other on the couch, no hand-holding. Instead, she has become silent herself off in the bedroom, spending hours in Discord or listening to Spotify, seemingly disconnected from me in our once vibrant relationship. I usually end up staying out in the living room because I can sense her frustration if I remain in the same space for too long. It's hard not to feel unwanted. I know I'm not the perfect husband, but I try my best to contribute around the house despite my challenges. Due to several disabilities, I can't work and I have a weak immune system that makes me susceptible to getting sick. Yet, I still do my part. I cook, clean, vacuum, run errands, and take out the trash. But it seems like with each passing day, she becomes increasingly intolerant of me. It hurts to feel like my efforts go unnoticed or unappreciated. The worst part is that there seems to be nothing I can do to change the situation. Her parents are her guardians and conservators, so if she isn't taking her medication or attending her doctor's appointments, I feel obligated to inform them since she tends to ignore my concerns. However, whenever I go over her head like that, it only leads to more conflict. She gets upset, feeling that I've betrayed her trust, which only complicates matters further. It's incredibly difficult to navigate the situation. I want to support her, but I'm left feeling helpless and unsure of how to bridge the growing gap between us. Story 15. I have 2 stories that illustrate just how unpredictable relationships can be. The first one is I was head over heels in love with this girl. We did everything together. We were practically inseparable. Our relationship was filled with laughter, late-night talks, and shared dreams for the future. But one fateful night, everything changed. I went to bed feeling content, only to wake up and discover that she had blocked me in absolutely everything. Social media, texts, calls, literally everything. It was the most bewildering thing. I tried to contact her because, well, who does that? After numerous attempts to reach out, I finally got a response, but it wasn't the one I expected. She started lying about me online, spreading rumors and posting my personal private information for everyone to see. My heart sank. How could someone I cared about so deeply turn into this person overnight? But it got worse. I eventually found out that she had been kids. That revelation was like a strike in the face. My feelings for her dropped in a heartbeat the moment I discovered that she was capable of such behavior. The person I once adored was now a complete stranger, and it felt as if my entire world had flipped upside down. I couldn't believe I had wasted so much time on someone who had turned out to be so manipulative. The second one is a story that isn't as absurd as the first one, but it's still pretty insane in its own right. I was dating this one person, and things seemed to be going great. We had a lot in common, shared similar interests, and enjoyed spending time together. It felt like we were on the same wavelength, and I was genuinely excited about where things were headed. But then, out of nowhere, they started expressing an interest in sleeping with my mom. Yeah, you read that right. My mom. My jaw dropped in disbelief. My feelings for them evaporated in an instant. How could they even think about crossing such a boundary? It wasn't just weird, it was completely not acceptable. To make matters worse, they attempted to turn my mom against me, trying to manipulate her into believing that I was the problem so they could have their way with her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That was a one-way ticket to end any remaining feelings I had for them. It was like the ultimate betrayal. It made me realize just how twisted the situation had become. In both cases, I learned valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and the importance of recognizing when a relationship has taken a turn for the worst. It's astounding how quickly feelings can change when someone reveals their true colors. Story 16. We were together for 11 years. She had bipolar. I was ex-army filled with alpha male rage. We mistreated each other for the first few years of our relationship until we slowly mellowed out. She would cycle through different psych meds to even out her high and low points. The meds would eventually lose their effectiveness as her brain became too used to them. Later on, in 2015 to 2016, her screaming fits directed at me got worse. I had stopped reflecting back screams at her by this time. One night, she flew off the handle. I'll never forget the sound of that crash. She was hurt pretty bad. At that moment, she was just reeling from the pain. I was just filled with concern in helping her get to the emergency room, and her demeanor did a complete 180. She cried the entire night. The doctors managed to pull out all the small shards. The pain had stopped pretty quickly. The damage from the smashed plate wasn't really terrible, but she said that it was the most agonizing she felt in her life. The next day, she was calm and we had a serious talk. She confessed to me that the past few years she just locked away a resentment of me. Everything that went wrong with her life, her lost friends, her lost job, she blamed me. Even when I was really innocent of a lot of what she went through in recent years, I just kept in mind how much of a rage she held against me for so long. That wasn't the last time she would go off on me too. The later manic episodes she had were never as bad as the plate incident, but we had drifted further and further apart. She would find comfort in other men and the affection we had just faded away. After so much of what we went through, even with my flaws and her flaws, we eventually learned that we were completely different people, with some of the same interests and tastes, but vastly different life philosophies and ways of dealing with problems. This might sound wrong, I know, but I'm just not strong enough to withstand her behavior anymore. Each one I suffer through just takes another piece of me. We live in different states now. We talk as friends from time to time, but the one who I thought was my soulmate just wasn't. I've developed a much more cynical view of romantic relationships now. To me, it has just become a power struggle between two people. In order to have any harmony in any relationship, one has to submit to the other. And it only takes so much strain and toll on the person to stay strong and take the onslaught of psychological and sometimes physical manipulation until they break. I've learned that I'm not the relationship type of person. I don't want to bend to another person's will, not force someone to bend to me. It's anti-ethical to freedom. Such is life. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.